Well, good afternoon. My name is John Pistol. I'm the president of Anderson University, and it's a joy to welcome you all here today as we welcome our distinguished guest, the former Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder. Thank you, Mr. Holder, for being here.
Glad to be here. Now, shouldn't you all be in class? So just remember, if you like Eric, I got you out of class.
So today is part of our recognition of Constitution Day, going back, a few hundred years. And even though it's not the day of the signing of the Constitution, September 17th was, but we are recognizing that as a former Senator Harry Byrd encouraged all students that receive any federal money in a 2004 bill. So since we get a little bit of federal money, we thought that would be a good thing. Now, when we worked out the date to come here, we didn't realize we'd be celebrating or commemorating Constitution Day, so just as awareness of that. So there's a lot of things that we want to do in the time we have this afternoon. One of the things that we'll do is we'll have a dialogue, ask some questions, and he can either answer them or do whatever he wants with them, obviously, since he's the guest. But if you have questions, we're going to leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end. We need to wrap up by about 2:45, but if you have questions, you should have a note card, or if you want something, write down that question and then pass them to the end, and then we'll have folks pick those up, and then Dr. Michael Frank and Jan Bell, who are organizing this, will pick those up and give those to me, and then obviously we won't have time to answer all those questions, but they'll vet those questions, and we'll go from there. So with that, again, welcome. So Eric Holder, just in terms of a little bit of background, if I read his entire bio, that would take the entire 45 minutes, so we're not going to do that. But he is the third longest serving Attorney General in U.S. history. And obviously not only the first African-American Attorney General, which everybody knows, he was also the first African-American Deputy Attorney General, which is frankly really the person who runs the Department of Justice, but he knows that. So, and he was also the first African-American U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, where he had also been a Superior Court judge. So he's been nominated and either confirmed by the Senate, but nominated 3 different administrations, Republican, Democrat. I had the privilege of working with him several years and just found him to be a great public servant. And so lots of other things: Columbia undergrad, Columbia Law School, 1976 honors intern in Department of Justice, public integrity, I believe, looks at public corruption cases. So just a long, distinguished career in public service. So with that, why don't you tell us a little bit about your sense of public service, some of the challenges and opportunities you've seen over your decades of service?
Yeah, you know, it's great to be here at Anderson. You have a great president, a wonderful person. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. John and I worked on some really interesting, tough things, and if you're in the trenches in the foxhole, you'd never want somebody other than John Pistol with you. He's a great man. He's a great man. You know, I came out of law school with a desire, a sense of idealism, and wanting to be engaged in public service. So I joined the Public Integrity Section of the Justice Department. It was formed after Watergate, because the Justice Department realized that it did not have a public corruption capacity to the degree that it thought needed to exist. Former Criminal Division head Richard Thornburgh, who became ultimately governor from Pennsylvania, put it together. And so public service for me has always been consistent with my sense of idealism. When you're in public service, you're not obligated to do anything other than the right thing. You're not beholden to a particular client. Your client is the American people. Your client is the Constitution that we celebrate. And so I've always liked the public sector jobs that I've had. It's why even now, you know, I was tired, I was ready to go, but now I'm not as tired. But I went. So it's, I even now miss, the 8:30 meetings that we had, where we go over essentially the presidential daily brief, and you look at the raw intelligence for the past 24 hours. Having that insider's view and then having the ability to shape policy, hopefully for the better and consistent with our Constitution. That's what I loved about public service.
Great. Well, so you, again, the third longest serving Attorney General, that's not an easy job by any means, being in the public eye. There is a certain politicization of that position, if you will, but maybe you could just tell us a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities that you saw in that position, if there's any particular matter that you'd care to talk about.
Yeah. The Attorney General really kind of serves at the nexus of public policy and the law, and the Justice Department in a post 9/11 world is really involved in a whole range of things. You sit on the National Security Council. You're responsible for enforcement of the criminal laws, antitrust laws, environmental laws. The Justice Department has 120,000 people or so. They don't want to admit it, but the FBI is a part of the Justice Department.
No.
Yeah. See.
No, I didn't say no.
Yeah, right.
He's making news here today, folks.
Right.
Yes.
Mueller, Comey, Chris Wray, they're all like, yeah, you look at the org chart, and Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General, and the FBI directors, well, they don't pay any attention to that.
We did. Yeah.
No, they don't. No, they don't. Not even that. But it's a fascinating job. Every day is different. It's what I loved about the job. There was no, other than the 8:30 meeting that we had every day, there was really no routine. You'd end up at the White House, you'd end up on the Hill, you'd end up in a plane flying someplace to give a speech or to interact with allies about a variety of things. It was the most fascinating job that I ever had. I did it for 6 years or so. It'll be for history to decide how well I did it. But I think about tough things. Making decisions about, as I was asked earlier, about where should the people who perpetrated the 9/11 attacks, where should they be tried? That was a tough decision. I said they should be tried in our civilian courts as opposed to the military system. And I anticipated that if we didn't do it in the civilian system, we'd end up in the situation where we are now. 16 years later, no trial. Protection of voting rights, something that I made a priority of while I was at the department. Criminal justice reform, a whole range of issues. You go into the job with the thought that you have these 3-4 things that you want to work on, and then things get thrust upon you. You can't dictate the things that you're going to have to confront, the things that you're going to have to decide. Criminal justice reform was something that I was thinking about doing, and then Ferguson happened, and that kind of accelerated the process for us to be involved in that way. The whole question of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, these are things that, again, you couldn't necessarily anticipate, but became things that became central parts of our lives. I don't know how many meetings you and I had with Bob Mueller, talking about national security related things, making tough decisions about information we could share, operations that we would conduct, things that we had to, keep secret and be criticized for, not doing something when in fact there was a really good reason why we didn't. Public service was, for me, was fascinating. It was an opportunity to be as idealistic as I hope I was, and to focus on doing things just for the right reasons.
You mentioned this large Department of Justice, which includes a lot of agencies, DEA, U.S. Marshal Service, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, explosives, maybe 1 or 2 other agencies, not sure about that.
He did not mention the FBI. You notice it, see? He can't bring himself to say it.
Oh, yeah. So you, as the Attorney General, you set priorities for the department, and obviously national security in a post 9/11 world was, well, I'll assume a top priority, but then how did you assess what the other priorities should be You mentioned voting, you mentioned Ferguson, civil rights, civil liberties, things of dealing with voting. How did you set the tone and the priorities for the department?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. When I came back to the department, I'd been the deputy attorney general during the Clinton years. Janet Reno was the AG. I came back to a fundamentally different Department of Justice post 9/11, where the department was really a part of a national security team in a way that it was not before. And I bet 50–60% of my time was consumed by national security issues. And the question was, I was actually concerned when I got back to the department that what I came to call the traditional parts of the department had not gotten the attention that they deserved, and we had been solely focused, or focused to too great a degree, on national security issues. So antitrust, environmental natural resources division, the civil division, the criminal division, doing things other than national security matters. These were places where I thought we needed to devote resources, the civil rights division, devote resources, devote attention to, in addition to doing the national security stuff. And so I really placed a lot of demands on the people in the department to say, all right, we're going to stay focused on national security, but we're going to do all of these other things in addition. And I am proud to say that the men and women of the department were up to those challenges. You get a lot of praise for being the leader of a great organization. Sometimes you get criticism, and the criticism is usually for the leader, but the successes are really because people in the department worked harder, didn't get any increases in pay, but worked harder, extended themselves to focus on those priorities that I grafted onto the things that they were already in the process of doing. But you make the determinations on the basis of your worldview. My observations as a line prosecutor, as a judge in Washington, D.C., as a U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C., as an American, 65 years old. I was much younger when I started off. And try to think about, well, what are the things, given the limited amount of time that I'm going to be Attorney General, how do I want to devote that time? What do I want to focus the department on? What do I want to be remembered for? What do I want to leave for the nation? And those are all the kinds of things that you consider as you're trying to make determinations about what the priority should be.
Yeah. So you mentioned Ferguson, a number of other police-involved shootings or other shootings, particularly of African-American young men or others, and given, obviously, your unique status as the first African-American Attorney General, how did you see your role? You went to Ferguson and you engaged the family. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think that is why diversity, I think, is a valuable thing. I was the first African American to be Attorney General, and so I brought with that certain perspectives that my predecessors could not have had simply because of the lives that they had led and the life that I led. Doesn't mean I was better or that they were bad. It just meant that in discussing things, I brought a certain perspective, a certain life experience that they had not had. I think that was for the better, in the same way that Janet Reno, having been the first woman to be Attorney General, brought perspectives that men could not necessarily bring. And again, it doesn't mean that you couldn't be a great Attorney General and be a white man. There are great AG. The person who I hold out as the greatest Attorney General is Robert Kennedy. His portrait was right next to me in the fifth floor conference room. But that notion of diversity, I think, is really something that is important and helps make organizations better. I think surrounding myself with a diverse staff, with a very diverse FBI, fundamentally different from the bureau that existed 50 years or so ago. I think made us a better overall United States Department of Justice.
Yeah. So before this meeting, the Attorney General met with a group of national security students, and they asked a number of probative questions. And one of those had to do with voting and gerrymandering of congressional districts and the 2020 election coming up and all that. Tell us a little bit about your interest in that and just your perspectives on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a system that's broken. I think that we have a system where politicians are picking their voters instead of voters picking their representatives. We have a system where, through gerrymandering, it's done by both parties. Lines are drawn in such a way that incumbents are protected, and they're almost made invulnerable to general elections. Republicans don't have to worry about beating a Democrat. Democrats don't have to worry about beating Republicans. They have to worry about getting primaried. The Republican has to be concerned about a Republican challenging him or her from the right. Democrats got to be worried about getting challenged from somebody on the left. And that drives people in the Democratic Party further to the left, Republicans further to the right, and it increases the polarization that we see in Washington, D.C. So I'm the head of this thing called the National Democratic Redistricting Committee that has been formed in anticipation of the 2020 census, when we will redraw the lines in the hope that we will have line drawing that's done in a fair way that will increase competition. I think that's a better thing. Let's make this not a battle of who can draw the lines the best, but who's got the best policies, who's got the best philosophies. Let's make this Republicans and Democrats fighting over their vision for the nation, as opposed to people now using computers and computer programs to draw lines so that that row over there goes into that district, and these people here are in this district, and you come up with things that, as I said, protect incumbents. The estimates are that of the 435 seats that exist in the United States House of Representatives now, 400 of them are non-competitive. Because they belong to one party or the other, and there's no chance, no matter how well funded, no matter how good the candidate is, you cannot beat the representative from the other party.
Yeah. You had a number of challenges. You've talked about some of those. Perhaps you could identify one, maybe two, that you felt best about in terms of dealing with that challenge. And then at the opposite end, something that you just really enjoyed doing as AG.
All right, well, let's go to the easy one. What I enjoyed doing as AG. One of the things I got to do, and I think I'm the first Attorney General to do this, I went to every district in the United States. There are 94 U.S. attorneys' districts. I went to every one of them during my 6 years. It took me 6 years to do it. I announced my I announced my resignation, and I had still one to go. So I got to Scranton, Pennsylvania. That was the last one I got to. So that was enjoyable, and it was made enjoyable by the thing that I missed the most about the department. I have to say I miss the people the most, and I do miss the people the most. Okay. The thing I miss the most, I don't have an airplane anymore. When I came here this morning, I lined up just like everybody else and put my TSA pre-check. You should get that. TSA pre-check.
All right.
Yeah.
Dang, here's another thing. Man, yikes.
But TSA pre-check, as good as it is not nearly as nice as walking into your own Gulfstream 5. The plane, if you're the Attorney General, you're never late. Plane doesn't leave until you leave. I have my little cabin in the front there. Staff knew that once I got on the front, no one was to come up there. And so I miss my plane. I miss my plane.
Okay.
That was the easy part. Challenges. I think really on the other side, the dark side of the job. I mean, I think about my worst day as Attorney General was the day that I went to Newtown, to Sandy Hook Elementary School. It was about 4 or 5 days after the shooting, and I met with a group of first responders and crime scene search officers, men and women. They put just the senior people there. So these were people, 10, 15, 20 years of experience. And I will never forget that day, going into the classroom where those little angels had been shot, and looking at the carpet and asking one of the crime scene search officers, I said, why, the carpet looks kind of funny here. There's kind of tufts, kind of picked up. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, that's where the bullets went. And I remember being in that classroom, little kids put up, what I want to do this year. And they had up there, each kid had a thing up that had not been taken down yet. And you know how little kids draw, letters the wrong way, the K's go that way instead of that way. And it was so touching, so heartwarming to see that. And it was juxtaposed against what had happened there. Blood was still on the walls. I saw the crime scene search pictures. And that was I remember leaving and thanking them for what they had done. They were in tears. I was in tears. My chief of staff was with me. She was in tears. It was my worst day as Attorney General. And the thing, I think also my biggest failure, I thought that the nation, having seen what happened in Newtown, would, respecting the Second Amendment, would come up with ways in which we put in place some reasonable gun safety measures. And unable to pull it off. Vice President Biden and I were tasked by the president to do that, and we met with a variety of pro-gun groups, all of whom, I gotta say, all of whom were really in a good place, pretty, wanted to be flexible, except the NRA. That was the only one. NRA would not meet with us. And the power of the gun lobby prevented from happening that which I thought should have happened. And I think if the nation had been with me on that trip to Newtown, had been with me as I walked into that classroom, had been with me when I met those crime scene search officers, those first responders, that we would have passed those gun safety measures.
Yeah.
That's I think my biggest failure in my worst day as AG.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask one more question, but if you have questions again, make sure you have those written down and pass to the end, and then we'll start getting those up here, and we'll get to many of those as we can. So tell us about your best day testifying on Capitol Hill.
That's an impossibility. There's never a good day. I mean, the only thing would be good is if, like, there was a fire alarm or something, and you had to leave. Spending 3-4 hours sitting in front of congressmen if you're on the House of Representatives side, or senators if you're on the Senate side, that's about the most trying thing that I had to do as AG on a consistent basis. I used to go up there. You had to go up at least 4 times a year for budget hearings and then for oversight hearings. In both houses, and putting up with the questions. I'm not wound the way to do it well. You have to understand that you want to get out of there without making news. No matter what's thrown at you, you don't want to respond so that they say, "Ooh, the camera," and so somebody questions your integrity. Somebody says you're dumb. Somebody says your policy's bad. I just naturally want to go, I want to respond. You hit me, I want to hit you back. But you can't do that. And so you sit there, and you've experienced it, and you just kind of sit there and you take it, and you take it, and you take it. When we used to go up, the head of our Office of Legislative Affairs, Ron Weich, would say to me as we were riding up to the Hill, because he knew I couldn't stand this stuff. He knew who I was, this hot-blooded West Indian. He'd say, "Go to your good place." Where's your good place?
You had one, huh?
He said, "Where's your good place, Eric?" And I say, "Beach in Barbados." He said, "All right, think of yourself on the beach in Barbados and stay there as long as you can during the hearing, And it was, it generally, got me through. But every now and again, and I'm sure you can find them on YouTube, some congressman would ask some question, and I would just say, "Nah, sorry, Ron, I got to leave the good place." And Louis Gohmert was one guy. He and I had some epic battles. So go to YouTube, put Eric Holder, Louis Gohmert, and you'll see when I was not in my good place.
Yeah.
Not fun.
So I know we have a number of questions, and I don't know if Dr. Frank has had a chance to take a look at those and assess and all that, but as we're bringing those up, is there one decision that you made as Attorney General that if you had to do it over again, you might choose something differently?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure. I think I'm pretty satisfied with the decisions that I made. I might have done things maybe a little differently. I think that I underestimated, for instance, in making the decision to try Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in the civilian courts. I didn't anticipate the political uproar that was going to cause, and maybe we should have done some more political work, working with the politicians in New York, the power centers in New York. I should have talked to Donald Trump, and convinced him to get on my side, he's an influential New Yorker, and actually, it was interesting because I remember talking to Congressman Serrano, a New Yorker congressman, and he said that it wasn't the political class that was against the trials, it was the business community that was concerned about the paralyzing effect and disruption that the trials were going to have. And so if I had to do something over, I might have been a little more political in rolling out that decision.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I know the number of folks in YPD, law enforcement, were concerned about the security costs of trying to put on trial the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks and co-conspirators and all that. So,
but we could have done it.
Yeah.
We could have done it.
Yes, we could have. So thank you for your questions. There's got to be 15, 18 here, and I'm sure everybody has something. So,
and we're going to answer every one of them. So I hope we're going to, with pizza, we've ordered pizza, and so that'll be served around 6.
So we're actually we're wrapping up at 2:45 because he's going to do some media interviews, and then he's got a 5 o'clock flight out of Indianapolis.
Oh no, I can cancel it.
Not on
6
the
o'clock
G5.
pizza.
So.
6 o'clock pizza. Who wants 6 o'clock pizza?
And which
It's
district
part of your
are you
tuition.
running? Yeah.
You have a right. You have a right to this pizza.
Can I borrow your credit card for? Okay, so yeah, man, this is costing
This is
me
my
more than I
last visit to
realized.
Anderson, folks.
We'll send you a bill for coming right now. And just in full disclosure, he's not charging us speaker's fees. He's not even charging us his travel costs. So I want to thank you for that. That's a.
And with the savings, you can buy pizza.
I can almost guarantee we're going to see him running for office someplace, and it might be from Indiana. He might move out here. So I think he'd get a lot of votes here.
Holder 2020, Indiana. Let's do this.
Yeah. Okay. As a citizen, I find it challenging to figure out what is true about what is going on in D.C. and politics in general. Do you have any recommendations for finding out the truth?
Ooh. It's interesting. I think that you have got to really expose yourself to a variety of sources. If you are a liberal, progressive, Democrat, you need to be listening to Fox. If you are conservative, Republican, you need to be listening to CNN, MSNBC. You need to take in as much as you can from a variety of places, and then use the training that you have, as Anderson students and people who are from outside the Anderson community, to figure out, where the truth lies. People will report the news in a way as objectively, as I think they generally hope they can, but with certain biases because we're just human beings. And so to figure out where the truth lies, I think you got to listen to a lot of news. You've got to do that, and you've got to listen to politicians and understand that Republicans and Democrats, have agendas, and that shapes, what it is that they say, the facts that they're going to rely on, the facts that they're going to ignore. And so I think it's really incumbent upon us as citizens to be engaged, involved, to be aware of, all of those things. And I think, it comes down to kind of the basics, reading the newspapers, reading magazines, staying abreast of current events. Being aware of history. Facts are hard things sometimes to come by, but they are the lifeblood of our democracy.
Yeah. Context is important, as you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So, another question, what are your thoughts on the protests by St. Louis citizens over the last several days?
Yeah, I think the decision that was made by the judge in the shooting case is one that has to be respected. You can disagree with it, and I think that you can protest that decision, and I don't have any problems with that. I am concerned, though, that some part of the protesters, put on the masks and all of that stuff, and then throw things into, store windows, right. And the property damage is not something that is, I think, appropriate, and I think is not. At the end of the day, it's counterproductive. I mean, you think about the great protests that have happened in this country and that really moved this nation. It wasn't about property damage. It was about women marching for the right to vote. It was about civil rights advocates, laying down and doing things in a nonviolent way. And those are the things that that move the nation. If you're out there and you're protesting, however legitimate the cause might be, and you're causing property damage to people who are uninvolved in the decisions, who are not in any way responsible for the thing that you're protesting, you're doing your own cause a disservice.
Yeah. Did you ever have any significant legal or policy differences with President Obama? If so, what are they?
I'm writing a book. It's interesting. President Obama is among a whole bunch of things. Among them, he's a very good lawyer, and he understood that there had to be a wall between the Justice Department and the White House. As Senator Leahy said it, the Attorney General is not the Secretary of Justice. He or she is the Attorney General of the United States with law enforcement powers, and that has to be exercised. That power has to be exercised in a non-political way. The Justice Department gets in trouble when that wall is not sufficiently high, and when the White House is interacting with the department. Now, having said all of that, President and I are friends, and so it kind of put an artificiality into our relationship. I knew things that he would probably be interested in that I couldn't share with him.
And your wives are friends also.
Our wives are friends as well, and so he has told me that, Eric, you were a good Attorney General, you did a great job, but there are about 3-4 things that he says that he disagreed with me about. And he's never told me what they are. He said, I'm not going to tell you while you're in office, obviously. And after I left, I said, well, you can tell me now. He says, no, I'm still in office. And so now he's been out of office for, 6, 7, 8 months. I had dinner with him on Saturday, and just as he was leaving, I said, you never told me what the 3-4 things were. He said, yeah, I'll get to it. So there are 3 or 4 things that I did that apparently he doesn't agree with. I don't know what they are at this point, and as soon as I find out, I'll let you know.
There you go. We'll invite you back.
I'm sure that I'm right and he's wrong about it. Wait, this isn't being recorded, right?
It might be, yeah.
No. I was kidding, Mr. President, kidding.
Right. So how can we begin to turn around the extreme polarization of our society?
Yeah. Well, I think, as I was talking about earlier, I think we can reverse that political polarization if we kind of really attack this problem of gerrymandering. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, I think that we as a people have to be bigger than we have become in the last few years. We have got to be willing to accept criticism, understand. We have to be a little less arrogant, People on the left don't have all the answers. People on the right don't have all the answers. That we have to acknowledge that, we have strong views, but we have to be willing to listen to people on the other side. And more often than not, that interaction produces, better results. So I think that, on an individual basis, we have got to be more willing to be more open to a variety of things. I think we're defining ourselves in narrower and narrower ways. I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm a liberal, I'm a conservative. I'm an African American. We're a whole variety of things. I'm a person who is obviously African American. But I'm also, the son of immigrants. I'm a kid who grew up in Queens, who had tons and tons of Jewish friends. We're all a conglomeration of things, and until we recognize that and act with all of those things, as opposed to those narrow definitions, we're not going to get beyond this polarization. But I think we're capable of doing it, and I think it's really incumbent upon our leaders. It's incumbent upon those in power to show us how to do that. And I think in the past, few years, and I don't mean just this administration or the prior administration, but I think really kind of going back, last 20, 30, 40 years or so, our leaders have not necessarily done the kind of job that I think is appropriate where you're trying to forge consensus. That should be, I think, what our leaders should be about.
Question about DACA. So the question is, what pathway do you believe is best for our DACA young people?
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I think, the DACA kids, maybe not as the young people at this point, they present a particular issue, and I think in some ways that's an easy one to resolve. I mean, if you look at the polling, Republicans, Democrats, conservative, liberals all say that they should not be moved out of the country. But I think what we need to do is really kind of focus on comprehensive immigration reform. People tend to forget a bill was passed by the Senate that comprehensively, dealt with the immigration problem. Was not called for a vote by Speaker Boehner. I think really that's, he's a good man. I like him a lot. That's a real black mark, I think, on his speakership, because I think if he had brought that to a vote, he might not have gotten the majority of Republicans to vote for it, but he would have gotten a really substantial number of Republicans, and he would have gotten a sufficient number of Democrats to pass that. And we would be, as a nation, in a much better place now than we are now, with a comprehensive view of how we're going to deal with the immigration problem, the 11 million people who are here in the United States living in the shadows. I think the DACA thing is going to work itself out through legislation. I think probably, my guess, bipartisan legislation, but I think that spirit really ought to go to the larger problem that we face and be used in a more comprehensive way.
Okay. And then I think I'm supposed to let the press know that if this is a couple-minute heads up, if you want to go on over to the room across the way for the press conference.
So now we can really have fun.
Welcome to do that.
Go. They're not leaving. Oh.
Yeah. So here's a comment with a question. The comment is, "Thank you for serving our country with intellect and decorum."
Oh, thank you.
It's a nice comment.
Yeah. Let's stop there. Stop there.
I was going to say.
Can I have that one?
There is a question with it.
Yeah.
I can almost guarantee you've never been asked this question. So why is the Attorney General a presidential appointee? What if the judicial branch voted or assigned the position? I'm not quite sure.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so that's...
You're right.
You've never had that one.
That's actually pretty interesting. I've never been asked. That's actually interesting. I've never been asked that question before.
Yeah. All the other questions were interesting too. This is just a different type of way.
Yeah. That's actually a pretty interesting concept. It's interesting because the Attorney General has kind of dual responsibilities. You are the person who has those law enforcement responsibilities, and you have to be kind of separated from your colleagues in the cabinet in a way that no other cabinet officer is. And yet you're still part of the administration, and you want to push policies that your president has run for and stands for. And so there's an interesting mix there that I think is probably solved by keeping it the way it is now. But it's an interesting thing. It's interesting. I'm not sure I'd want to have an attorney general who was divorced from political reality. That maybe gives that person a little too much power, kind of like the FBI director, It's just 10-year term, do whatever you want, I guess, Or not. Good point. Point well taken.
I'm just saying.
I'm just saying, yeah.
Right.
But that is a very interesting, I'm not sure who wrote the question, that's actually a very interesting concept. And, an attorney general appointed by the judiciary subject to Senate confirmation, that's pretty interesting. I have to think about that.
Yeah.
I have to actually think about that one. I mean, to divorce the department from, the day-to-day political pressures that you have to deal with. Because again, as President Obama, I think, understood that wall, but that doesn't mean that there weren't various people in the White House, trying to talk to people in the department to push their little agendas. Although there's a contacts policy that's in place. Only the Deputy Attorney General is supposed to speak to the White House counsel. But then you'd hear about people, trying to kind of slip a memo in, an email, something like that. Be able to divorce the department from that kind of pressure that'd be a good thing. But I still think I'd want to have, in some form or fashion, the Attorney General accountable, maybe a little more accountable.
Right. I have a little bit of personal insight into that issue about the separation, if you will, between the White House and the FBI, and so yeah. So we have about 3 minutes. That's all the time we have for questions. Give you time to wrap up.
Sure.
How would you like to do that?
I pick up on one of the questions. I guess somebody asked the question about how we deal with polarization. We're talking. This is a celebration of our Constitution. One of the greatest documents, I think, that has ever been written. It is something that has served this nation well, though amended, a number of times. An imperfect document when it was first written, because it talks about, men as opposed to men and women. It didn't include African Americans, other than as 3/5 compromise. But it is an enduring document, and it is something that is uniquely American. We were at lunch, and I was talking about the fact, if you all have been watching the Ken Burns Vietnam special, if you've not been, you should. I mean, do your studying, but then watch this as well. And Ho Chi Minh, when the Japanese were pushed out of Vietnam in the square in Hanoi, reads to the assembled people there the first part of our Constitution. All men are created equal, which shows you that the concepts that are contained there are really universal ones. And I think that we need to commit ourselves in a way that we have not recently to those universal concepts, to the things that has made this country great, made this nation exceptional. Martin Luther King said that the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice. And I think that that's true. But it only bends because people put their hands on that arc and pull it towards justice. And I think that that's the thing that we as citizens have to do. We can't expect that people we elect are going to be solely responsible for progress in this nation. We as individual citizens have to come up with ways in which we make this nation better. However old you are, whether you're a man or a woman, whatever your race, your ethnicity, there are ways in which you can interact, for instance, with young people who are starved for the kind of attention that we as adults can give to them. There are community programs that you can be a part of that will make this nation, your communities, better. There are ways in which you can get involved in the political system to make it more responsive to the desires of the American people. I think we've sat back a little too much, where we become spectators in a nation that, as defined by our Constitution, expected us to be participants. And that's what I would urge everybody to do. Find ways in which you participate individually. And it's not going to be an easy thing. You've got your personal life, you've got your work life. Guys, we got to watch inordinate amounts of sports. But if you find an hour or two a week to do something like that, it won't be easy, but you'll feel better about yourself at the end of that week, and you will have made the nation better if you do exactly that. So I would urge everybody to figure out, what is it that you can do? What is it that you can do to make this nation better? What is it that you can do to make this nation consistent with the concepts that are contained in the greatest governing document that has ever been put forth, our Constitution? We have it within us. We have that capacity. We have that ability. We've made great progress as a nation. We're still not yet at the place where we need to be, but we can get there with an aroused and involved citizenry. So I would urge all of you to be involved, to find a way to make this nation better.
Please join me in thanking former Attorney General Eric Holder. Thank you. Take care.